Tape 4, EA meeting, May 76.
She was giving a lot of time to it.
A possible suggestion. The question is how long did you take over the instructions before you handed in the beginning, before you handed it over to one of the missionaries?
Well, that was done first it was done in agreement with the people in Europe. And it was the case of starting with the instructions for aspirantship. They said, you handle that up until the time when the first professions. And then when that time arrives, that the first ones are ready to be professed, then write to us again and let us know whether you think one or the other among them might begin to assume that responsibility with some help from you, but begin to assume it in order to get some information. And that's how it worked.
The second thing.
I was only aspirant mistress for 3 years.
Sure.
And which was good because...
I was wondering whether we could use when they're ready to have directors of instruction, whether we could use the system that they're using now for the third order. For the novice masters and novice misters, they have the first year, they have a week of instruction. In other words, they from all over Brazil, they go to a certain spot or from a certain region, they go there and they're really brainwashed and blitzed for a week. And Franciscan spirituality, how to run meetings, how to do this, that, and the other thing. Then they have, once a month, they receive from the central headquarters, they receive written instructions, follow-up from what they have. Then the next year, they might have a weekend. But once a year now, the novice masters and novice misters are meeting for continual formation in order to help the
somewhat like it's done in the order, like in the province, formation,
right.
Meetings of the formation.
And I was wondering if it would be feasible to do something like that once we get to a certain level.
Yes, it would, yeah, it would, certainly.
Well, their annual retreat is something like that. It's a kind of a indoctrination, a whole week.
Please.
The Sims annual retreat, they come together and they really get strong indoctrination.
We have, for instance, meetings of group leaders now after the elections. One of the things that was started just this year, it's the year of elections, was to meet with the newly elected council, meaning group leader and her council, to go over with them for the course of the day, it's only one day, what their duties are and what's expected of them. It's a move in that direction. It's not yet, as satisfactory as it could be for further development. The ones that I particularly feel for are those that are considered isolated. Some of them are very faithful. They do. They're sent their lesson and they're asked questions about it. They have to respond in writing. It's like a correspondence course, what it amounts to in practice. It's, it's helpful. It's the best that can be done under the circumstances. The Institute permits it, but it's still, they're not being developed too much in the communitarian aspect of this way of life, except when they're together in times of retreat. Communitarian not meaning, of course, any extended period of living together. This situation here is just because of the house in the center, otherwise they wouldn't be living together.
Does that have a special...
But you have that up there, don't you?
Is there any special formation needed for the ones that are actually together? And there's a couple of others that live 2 or 3 together in a home or apartments.
The only other instance, in St. Paul, of course.
Paul,
yeah. Of course, Mary House in St. Paul, there are 4 or 5.
5 of them live there.
Yeah. That, of course, originated as a kind of an apostolic center before they even knew anything about the Institute. It was, I went out there and gave about 2 retreats, I guess, in summer once, and they happened to come to make the retreat. They heard about the retreat and its theme, and they came to make it. And I got to know them and simply questioned them a little bit about their way of life, and they mentioned they had a certain priest who was from the diocese who was there, had founded the place for the kind of works they were doing. And then when inquiring more about their type of life, it was just, well, they were leading the life of a kind of a homemade pious union. It never had any approval in the diocese. The bishop was made aware of it, and, you know, it didn't do anything one way or the other. And then it became almost like a one-man's preserve. He was the pater familias, really. I merely questioned them if they wanted to go in a different direction of actually becoming an established institute, either a new institute or joining one already in existence. And the first reaction was no, that this priest would probably favor that, and it was what Father said. So, you know, I wasn't going to put into their business. But after a second such encounter with them, they seemed a little more inclined. But always, their reaction, Dorothy was the lady at the time, no, we'll start our own. If we start one, it'll be our own. So that was all right, too. And finally, I had an occasion to talk to their bishop once, and somehow the subject came up with this place, and I said to him, you know, it would be to their advantage if they really became a church-recognized society, whatever you want to call it, and the direction might have to be re-examined. And in fact, just around that time, I was invited by this priest who was founding this to come out and give a regular week's retreat to them. And then it really came more to a head in talking to each one individually to see what their hopes were and for the future. But then they came much closer to saying, I guess we'd better move in that direction and get ourselves closer to the diocese, the Church of St. Paul. And it was agreed that they would, even the priest said they could do that. And when it finally came, the severance came, it was kind of a painful thing. It was a little distressful to him, and he almost sued them and offered some monies that he claimed he gave them. And that was a little complicated. It's straightened out now. The bishop had to make a decision on it. But they then agreed to have representatives of the different existing institutes, at least 3 of them, to come and talk to them, which they did. The Dominican father went out. Of course, I'd been there that week in the retreat. Someone else went. And then again, another visit to the bishop, and finally they were to vote. When they voted, they said, well, they thought they would try out the missionaries for the kingship. Because when they questioned the bishop, they themselves questioned him. He said, I'm not particularly interested in starting a new institute here. He said that requires a lot of care and some expertise. And he said, I couldn't do it myself, and I don't think I could afford to send a man to do it. And he said, if you're asking me as Bishop of the Diocese, I would say join an existing one. Find out something about different ones. Make your choice, but join an existing one. And that led, finally, after all that, got into the missionary education. And they've never regretted it. They're really happy with it. But it does account for the fact of a group living together, because they they own that property together.
Yeah. How long ago was that they joined us?
Yes, I am. Gosh, it's getting more towards 10 years now, I guess.
10 years.
Must be that.
Yeah, more than
Perhaps more, yeah.
1963, 1963, I think.
Oh, yeah.
No?
13.
It was in the 60s, I remember right,
Yeah.
Archbishop Binns.
Well,
we had one.
and then who was in charge first? Who was the first spiritual?
The first one was Juniper.
Juniper, yeah.
Yeah.
He was there. That's when he was there.
We
Yeah.
had, I think,
He was there until '66. So
Yeah.
when he went to
when he
General
went to Rome
Council.
as Procurator
Yeah.
General of the Order.
So it was before '66. It was over 10 years. Yeah.
Yeah.
Then Bonaventure took over.
Yeah, Bonaventure wasn't the immediate successor.
No.
He had a little man that played the accordion.
Howard.
Yeah, Howard.
He's pastor of St. Bonaventure.
Is it
He's up
Hanson?
there now. He's the third. He's up there now at St. Bonaventure's. He's pastor.
Was Hanson, was that his name?
Yeah, Howard Hanson.
Canon Lawman.
But he's up in the area too, so we got three of us up
Yeah,
there.
he came and brought a squeeze box with him. He entertained us.
Yeah.
Well,
That doesn't militate against secularity or the flexibility of the original establishment when groups go
oh,
together. It seems to be a bit,
Well,
a convent or
it was
community
a-
life.
Yeah, not, of course, in the sense that they all do things together more than they do here, but it's not what you call the regular norm, that's true.
No.
Regular norm is for them to live on their own individually with their own immediate blood relatives and the family, or any way they like, complete freedom, but not to tend towards conventional life.
Of course, these work out on different jobs. A couple of them are nurses, and a couple of them do something else.
Yeah, they, like here, some of them are teachers.
Do they get any vocational spots?
Well, they got, we've had
Oh, yes.
yeah, a few in the recent years, and a few more nibbles now and then.
Those who have joined since that time are not living there.
Yeah.
They live outside.
There's
In other words,
two teachers, two
say if you had
There are
3 or
two
4
sisters there.
missionaries in a
Yeah.
particular area,
Sisters Germain.
and
Mhm.
so they were living
Yeah,
in,
brother
by
priest,
themselves
yeah,
in
brother
little
was another
apartments.
brother
It
priest
wouldn't
died.
be wise to have them
It's
get together, those that wanted to.
And to live all together in one place,
Uh-huh.
you better not to.
You better not to.
As it tends a little towards conventualism, which is
Yeah.
not characteristic of them.
Mhm.
We had 3 of them living together in Wilmington, Delaware. And that group there got to be a little bit ingrown, as a little community. It's disbanded now. And we began to notice that, and we felt that we'd have to bring it to their attention.
Gotta beware that conventionalism, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Is that a sensitive issue or something? or-
that's,
No, the name-
All of them consensual.
The title convention.
But that doesn't represent any differing philosophy among you as brothers or anything.
no.
It did once upon a time.
Yeah.
I thought you wore a belt instead of the cord.
No. Ready.
Oh, no, the cord, that's what always distinguished that habit, isn't it, from the Augustinians? They wear a belt.
Yeah,
Another-
yeah. Augustinians were about, yeah.
Yeah.
And then the
Cord.
TORs come with a real fancy pom-pom on the end of their cord, you know.
Yeah, that's right. Your question, of course, pertained to this, the content of the formation. That's just about where it would lie. The elements for which we're more responsible, directly or indirectly.
That does, that living together does reduce their independence and their personal thrust, I
Yeah,
think.
it does. Of course, for them, they bought that place. It's for them a personal
Yeah.
investment. Each one has an
Yeah.
investment in
It's,
that. And
it does offer a center. That's for the center,
Yes.
you know.
That's true. They had functions there that invited other people using it for an apostolic purpose. They certainly kept the property up.
The property certainly serves the institute. Certainly, yeah.
One further point on this content of formation. If it's possible, or to the degree to which it's possible for us to be alert to the kind of reading that would be helpful to them in their vocation. So much, of course, it's printed, and it even requires time to even become aware of the titles and the content of different things from bibliographies that are published, but to be alert to what might be helpful to them. Keeping their special vocation in mind, of course, is a good thing. At the USCC, annually there are quite a number of publications, not large books for the most part, but pamphlets, sometimes as many as 100 pages or less, sometimes simply copies of official statements of bishops, but on issues that pertain to the mission of the church. And a good thing is, of course, if a group, as a group, can afford to subscribe to that annually. The price isn't so high. Connie might know what it is each year. And for that amount, you receive every one of those publications, many of which are quite helpful. Others might not be as relevant to them. But there's no great loss because they're not expensive books. And in that way, they can keep abreast of, of this mission of the church in the world, of which they're an important part. They're more likely to read the things of that restricted length, say 50 or more, or 70 pages, sometimes even less, than they would be to find time to read whole books.
This house, this Mary House in St. Paul offers, a good library center for anyone
Yes.
group that wants to come back and forth. They don't,
Yes, they do.
each one doesn't have to own their own library.
It's true, yes. Yeah, they've gathered that library over a period of years since they started. They're good cooks, by the way, if you ever get out there.
No kidding.
Yeah, they are. Gee, a lot of wholesome food.
Do they go to their parish church for mass?
That's right, the parish church is just a few doors away, yes, they go there.
What
About
parish
half a
is
block.
that?
St. John the Evangelist in
Little Canada.
Little Canada, just a suburb about
Canada.
6 miles north of St. Paul.
It was a French settlement, that area, and so the parish used to have sermons in French besides in English. I don't think they have any more, do they?
No. The pastor himself doesn't completely understand the whole thing. He's a little bit careless sometimes and reserved. They mentioned that to me recently.
One of the things that a former pastor did, who was there when they became a secular institute, and with whom they shared their knowledge of their condition of life, it happened that I was going out there for the very first the first members, after they had finished their formation. And the pastor said it was to be on the Sunday, the Feast of Christ the King, an ideal day for a profession. So he said, I'll tell you what to do. He said, I have Mass in the upper church. And he said, use the lower church. Nobody will be there. Have your function there just the way you like it, and we'll be upstairs. And so we agreed. And why I bring it up is because it has some relationship to what I said about the mission of the church, about them being inserted into, well, we were down there, and I was just giving the homily, appropriate somewhat to what was going on, and all of a sudden, the loudspeaking system, which he was using upstairs, came full blast downstairs. And the one sentence that came out like a thunder was, it's because of what's going on down there that we have something good going on up here. And in context, it referred to something else. He was a farmer in this day, or a farmer's boy. And he talks about the roots and all that goes on underneath the soil. If it wasn't for that, you wouldn't have the trees and all of that. But that's the sentence that boomed out. And I thought, well, that's a kind of a boost for the missionaries. They all broke into laughter. I stopped the homily for the minute. We listened to a few more sentences, and then the adjustment of the acoustics was improved, and we went on with the ceremony.
Another problem up there with living together now is the age of a couple of them. They're up in the middle 70s.
Yes.
Two older ones. It gets to be kind of a problem. Living
Gee,
together at that age.
that would seem to me to be a big advantage. In other words, in years ahead, we'll have, say you have 5 or 6 missionaries in an area, and one might be getting, very elderly. It would seem like one of the other ones could move with her and help take care of her.
That's another way to look at it, yes. You do.
Well, see, what the general law for secular institutes requires is that there be one central house, at least one, for the institute. That was why this was established. See.
Oh, I see.
Now, of course, for an area like St. Paul, which is quite far from here, or any other, they could have such a place. New York could, if they wanted one. Not that they necessarily have a group of any size living there, but a place like set the headquarters of their work, places of meetings, of their apostolic activities, and to think in terms of helping the elderly if there's no other way through no other provision. Yeah.
What is the role of a spiritual director in the ongoing formation of all the missionaries?
Yeah. That's a personal and private role. It's more, it would touch their vocation to the extent to which the individual spiritual director needs to know the way of life of the individual.
Yeah.
So he certainly could read and should read the Constitution so as to direct her the right way. Each one is encouraged to have that kind of assistance. A number of them don't, even though it's often been mentioned. They are encouraged to have it. Our only concern in our capacity of EA would be that they're being helped by the person within the framework of the Constitution, of the way of life. If it turns out that they become confused and say, well, they're being pulled in one direction here, one there, then we say, well, you know, the vocation is a commitment to God. It's something that you vowed and promised, and so it would be, we'd advise changing in such a case to get someone that works along with us, because the conflict is going to destroy in the end, or harm you at least. Otherwise, you never interfere with that at all.
One thing that's interesting in that regard, I was talking to, I guess, Alan and a couple other priests. There seems to be a real concern in the United States among spiritual people. You know, there is a system, I think it's kind of identified with the Jesuits now. It's not Ignatian, but it's
Directed
identified.
retreats.
Huh?
Directed retreats.
No, spiritual direction. Where the director, you know, is constantly giving direct commands as though the will of God comes through him.
Oh, yeah.
And this can be terribly harmful.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, boy.
The role of the director seems to be much more kind of a person who will be able to perceive what the Spirit of God is doing in the person.
Yeah.
You know, that type of thing.
And reflect that back to the person.
Yes, so that they can see it and accept it as their own, yeah. Yeah, that's really delicate business, that
Yeah.
kind of direct command.
But I would think that if you knew that some
Yeah.
priest had that mentality, which was a valid mentality, but seems like it it's kind of just doesn't fit today in the way that everything's going. It might be wiser to steer a person away from that type of practice. St. Francis, is at least talked about the Holy Spirit as being the Minister General of the order.
Yeah, that was, wasn't that nice and simple and beautiful?
He's our retreat director.
Yeah.
Tablature robes.
Were you the one asking?
Pardon?
Were you the one asking where about the retreat house? Well, yeah, I think I said Wisconsin. It's Minnesota.
Wisconsin, yeah.
It's
Yeah,
Minnesota.
you mentioned Wisconsin.
Yeah, it's Minnesota.
Southwest of St. Paul.
Yeah, it's 25 miles south of Minneapolis, downtown Minneapolis, and about a little bit more, 28 miles
From
southwest
St.
of
Paul.
St. Paul, yeah.
Italy has
Yeah.
probably many common houses of this type.
Yeah, they have about a whole chain, it's like chain restaurants. They have about 18 in the country, large retreat houses. But they only have one, or maybe at most two, I don't think any more than two missionaries in each of these places. They hire quite a bit of help of a young lady, young Italian girls who want to earn a little money while they're studying. And they hire them, especially in the season of retreats. Some of them are not open all year round, it gets very cold. But for the duration of the season, whether long or short, they hire some local help. But the director of the house is always a missionary, usually an assistant. But otherwise, they don't form little communities there. And they're fairly large. They can accommodate as many as 100 people in some of those places, or 80 people.
Stephen?
Call them OSCs.
Is there any reason for sort of laying low on pushing vocations for either the diocesan priests or for laymen, instead of just pushing it for women?
Oh, you mean in the Institute?
In the end.
Well, no, it's not a case of laying low. The men don't, first of all, they don't go for it as readily.
They don't go for
They
it.
don't as readily, no. No, it took quite a while before we got the first one. He's a good, solid person, too. He's great. Belash is his name, Polish-American. We get a number of inquiries, not as many as for the women, but as Barbara was saying yesterday, concerning some of the responses that they make and don't get anything further, that happens more frequently among the men inquirers after they learn the nature of it, what the obligations are, especially the vow and so on. That usually ends the correspondence. That I wouldn't give up on that. I'd welcome the assistance of any priest in the province who might just go out after that, make himself available, contact men, letting them know about it, and so to more actively build it up, because it gets too much for one person. No, I'd welcome that very much. I like working with them. In fact, give them their annual retreat. Some of the Italians come over here to make their annual retreat. There's two professors of medicine, doctors and professors of medicine at the Gemelli University in Rome.
How many are there in the men's group
Who come over
worldwide?
here. Worldwide, not too many, about 60. And the women are 4,000, so you can see the great disproportion. That's true of all the institutes, a great disproportion of women versus men. The
Church
priests,
on Sunday, too.
the priests group presents certain difficulties as far as getting them together because of their, not so much for an annual retreat as for, say, a monthly day of recollection. That doesn't mean that that they should not be accepted if there is that difficulty. If there's a group, living in the same diocese or the same city even, there's a chance of getting together for maybe 3 or 4 hours at a time. There's appointments and all like that vary so much. But what they do in Italy, and the priests are between 250 and 300, which is a nice group. Some fine men. In fact, one bishop who came to one of these meetings, who had himself been a priest missionary, he said, to us as we're talking in little groups, he said, I can't announce this in my diocese because many of them might not understand or might think that I'm partial. He said, I'm delighted with the priest missionaries in the diocese because of their fidelity to the duties. You can ask them almost anything, you'll get it. They're prayerful men. And so he said, they're an asset. But he said, sometimes you'll hear a person say, because this one was chosen to be a bishop, maybe he was a member of Secular Institute and they're showing partiality. And he said, that isn't really true. And I don't want any of them to get that idea that they're in the Secular Institute, so we're going to push them to become a bishop. Even though here or there are some that are, but it's on their own merits. So Bill,
I could be an Italian bishop if I wanted to.
Yeah, you had the hat on last night, I noticed. He had, whose capuche did he have on? Yours. There was one point that I mentioned here in reference to these special times of formation, namely the period of aspirantship and so on. I talked about the 3 years after profession. That's something that we haven't been able to, so far, to do here, but which is well worth our efforts again to see if we can. And that is to have, make it possible for those who are in the period of 3 years after the profession to follow a program somewhat different from the general program followed by all the professed missionaries, study program I'm referring to. Because they're suddenly professed, not suddenly professed, but I say when they're professed and then they go back, they still need some help. And in Italy, they've worked it out the way that I pointed out. It has to do with this number 2 question. The 3rd year after profession, to identify the motives and the ways of expressing their vocation. Motives making sure that the roots are getting deeper, and then also this ability to recognize more quickly what the sacrament of the moment is, meaning in terms of how can I use this situation for the Church's mission of salvation. What can I do? What can I say? After having had some practice in it for those 3 years, they now are considered to be, or are expected to be, more practiced in it, but still in need of further conscious effort in that direction till it becomes an habitual thing. Now, when it comes to the contribution which the spirit of St. Francis can make to the formation, I might give 2 points in that regard. One would be if our awareness of this special spirituality, which is an essential part, an essential element rather than our own vocation, because we were called to this way of life, our experience of it, our knowledge of it, flows over into them, especially in a very wholesome, optimistic attitude, that it's conceived and born in love, of course, a strong love of God, meaning that love can overcome all the obstacles. Even when Christ was dying on the cross, he was overcoming the malice, or triumphing, I would say, over the malice that encompassed his death, because it was turned into salvation and into his own conscious awareness that he was fulfilling his Father's will and expressing his love even unto death for us, and what it would accomplish for all ages to come. So that wholesome, optimistic attitude, a joyful way of looking at things, because as long as God is within us and he's, say, the captain of our soul, good is bound to come out of every situation, so we don't need to get down at the mouth. That could be, they need to be helped in that regard. The simplicity, certainly. A certain spirit of detachment, because when it comes to translating poverty in terms of their life, that's going to come out in one of these discussions that were assigned to the various ones among you. So we'll stress that more when that comes out. When it comes to their vow of chastity, living in the world and having frequent and regular contacts with people of both sexes, how to conduct themselves in such a proper way, without fear or tension, being themselves, and at the same time women of principle, so that they do really give the sign of what that consecrated state stands for. We like them to overcome fear in that regard, because the strength comes within, and they do more for the people who come in contact with them than usually others do for them. They are confident. Their confidence is built up in that regard. There is, whether we can devote a presentation discussion on Franciscan spirituality as touching them will depend on our time, because I want to, now that we've discussed this or presented this, to get into those individual points or items that each of you is going to lead us in. I'd like to take care of those, if time still permits, then we get into the Franciscan spirituality more ex professo, because it is an important part of this. The only reason why I didn't say, well, we'll have that this afternoon is because we want to get in those other items. We do have a session, combined session, and I don't know just how soon you have to leave. And you all stay till tomorrow? No one has to meet a deadline or anything?
The plane doesn't leave till tomorrow evening.
Oh, I see. Yeah.
I'm leaving Monday morning. But I was going to our Friary tomorrow afternoon or evening, whenever we get
Yeah.
the days.
Well, I'm sure it won't go tomorrow afternoon.
No problem.
Maybe at most tomorrow morning, but that noontime will sure be the cutoff date if we go that long. Well, in that case, it's...
According to the
we
schedule,
make
I think they say the same as Saturday. Now, whether that means...
That means lunch at 1, I think.
Oh,
I know
Yeah.
I have to leave. My plane leaves at 3:30, but I don't think there'll be any conflict at all.
no, there'll be no conflict. Well, that's fine. I think we can do
Pardon?
all that we want
Provided
to
you're
do.
not too hungry.
Well, if I eat lunch, if it goes an hour, I don't think it'll...
Sure.
Yeah.
45 minutes to the airport, right? 45.
Yeah. which is a national airport.
On Monday. On Monday might be a little bit longer. Memorial Day.
I go at 5:30.
Oh.
I imagine most of those who are going to the airport,
Which one, you go to Dulles?
with the exception of those who might be
National.
going to the opposite coast,
You go to Dulles.
will be going as late as possible on Memorial Day.
But there'll be people between here and there, so I mean.
Oh, yeah.
A lot of traffic.
There'll be some
yeah,
cars
that's
on
what I
the
mean.
road, yeah. But yeah, it's hard to estimate.
Might even be a parade down there across the bridge
Yeah,
at Arlington Cemetery.
Tomb of the
That's
Unknown
right.
Soldier.
Is the Franciscan, what do you call it, the Americas close to here?
Yes, if you've never seen it,
Do you what?
that would be something maybe for all of you to see.
What's that, the,
The Academy of American
Academy of
Franciscan History.
American History.
oh yeah, Finbar's coming over tonight,
Is he?
right after supper.
I was just wondering whether Cormac is still hanging around there.
Cormac? I don't know.
Cormac McDougall?
I don't know.
McDonald?
It's been a little while since I've been over there.
That's part of the Smithsonian Institute.
The chapel itself is
I'd like to see it.
Typical day written out here. Oh yeah, the typical day would be the 8 a.m. morning prayer, followed by breakfast, and I would be there, you know, for the morning prayer. Breakfast, 9:30 conference, and possibly a brief discussion after the conference to make sure they heard what I said or understood what I said, and a period of silence and reflection. And
how long is that period about, Father?
oh, well, from 9:30 to about 10:15, and then it'd be an hour and a half of silence, reflection, and the sacrament of penance, and sacrament of reconciliation, plus personal conferences. But I would also pick that up later on if I didn't get it in the morning. I would stay on until 5 or even later in the afternoon to continue the sacrament or give personal conferences as long as it was needed. I usually had to be home by 8 o'clock, or tried to get home by 7 o'clock to work on the retreat that evening. Liturgy would be 11:45 and lunch at 12:30 or 1:45, depending upon how long the liturgy would take. And the rest of this thing, the homily and so forth, we would follow the suggestions that were proposed there.
This is what, on a Saturday?
On Saturday, this is a Saturday, and it has to be a second or alternate Saturdays because of the nurses working. They get every other weekend off, the nurses Jane and Lucy. So that works on a Saturday. And there'll be a council meeting after lunch while the other non-councilors are doing the dishes. Then a 2 o'clock conference followed by silence, prayer, discussion, and then at either 3 or 4 o'clock or thereabouts, the evening prayer would conclude the formal day of recollection, but I would stay on for personal conferences and the sacrament
They have
afterward.
the council meeting too on the same day, do they?
They would have that, yes, they would work that in while the others were doing the dishes, so it would be a half an hour after lunch, right immediately after lunch.
Is that all they need? Is that all they take for a council meeting?
Most of the time, yeah.
I guess being, since a number of them live
Small,
together,
but-
they can counsel.
And they're there all together most of the time, so. And if they
You-
need
you
more
go to-
time,
You go to Mary House for this.
I go to Mary House for this, yeah. That's 35 miles away from where I live.
Yeah, that's, that's.
I'm
a
making about
sacrifice.
40 minutes. It's freeway all the way for me. Nearly
Do
all.
they feel as though it's crowding them too much? Do they ever say that? We get feedback like that once in a while, because here, of course, they do all the kitchen work besides, and that's on a day of recollection. I'd like to see them completely free of that. We have a black lady come in, but you can't do the whole thing we have a larger group, and.
They haven't expressed any real concern about that. They do a pretty good job of it, although the total time is pretty compact. It would be caught that way because of the total time. So.
I was just wondering how much time are they really completely free, say, for meditating or for being somewhat alone?
Completely right. There's a shortage of time for
Yeah.
recollection.
That's what
and
the
private
need
prayer.
came through rather strong here,
Yeah.
that they wanted more time, so we made provision for it.
And that could probably be handled if it would work overnight.
Yeah.
But we're still open. I mean, they are still open on getting it overnight. The 2 or 3 that come from out, 3 or 4 that come from outside would have a little bit difficult. Well, they could probably come back. But
Yeah.
they have to drive between 30 and 45 miles.
Yeah, that's a consideration.
Yeah, yeah.
They can't accommodate.
And they don't come together. The 2 of them live out our direction. They won't come together because of the identity problem, you know.
Oh,
Mildred and Mary Hart will never come together. See? Of course, I
Because
live in the same direction too, but
I figure if they're seen together, that's
Yeah.
a giveaway.
I think once or twice they probably parked the car in some neutral place, but it happened to be in some spot that they couldn't leave it
Do
there.
you think that they're a little overly concerned about that?
I think they are, but
Yeah, it seems.
that's one reason they're not making that retreat out at our place. Mary
Really?
Hart or
Don't they get
Mildred
along
wouldn't.
together?
Huh?
Don't they get along?
Oh yeah, very
yeah.
well. But Mildred, one of the very good ones, you know, the strong ones, works at our place as a volunteer secretary, and she's at our place for prayer meetings and all kinds. She's all
Yeah,
the
she's
time during her spare
fixed.
time. So it would be hard for her to maintain her identity or her
I see, identify with the missionary.
yeah.
No, it's a question of this identity, you see, the reserve.
And Mary Hart's been associated with us through the Third Order for so many years, and with all of our people who are in the order know her, but she would want to risk.
Well, that retreat isn't really advertised as SIM, is it? Or is it just why wouldn't?
We do not have it on our schedule.
Oh, well, God.
We left it off, but we publicized it,
Yeah,
in another way.
I see.
But we don't have it on our retreat schedule because we didn't want other people to want to get in on it. Like we have a lot of sisters and women who come that say, well, why can't we get in on that or something like that? We could say closed retreat. We could have put that down, but then that wouldn't have helped publicize it. So.
Yes, I see. Well, each place works it out the best way they can. On that point, though, about the reserve, every once in a while you encounter someone who's overly concerned. And well, from time to time, we open up the case again with the individual and say, well, if your mother or your father or you both knew about it and were willing to be quiet about it, would that take some of the tension off you so that you wouldn't feel like you're running out on them? And if so, the permission's easy to give.
That would be the case, I think, with Mary Hart. I think she should tell her father and mother, especially now that she has additional responsibilities which will take her away. And she and her brother live with her parents, and their Irish parents are overly concerned about her every minute. I mean, they love her and all that, but she takes care of them like
Oh, yeah.
no one else takes care of their parents. But they don't know about it yet, and she's used all kinds of subterfuges to maintain her reserve. But I think it would be a good idea.
could
Maybe
tell her.
I know her parents real well. Maybe I should try to talk to her and ask that I tell them, and I think they would respect that. She's afraid that they would love it, but she's afraid because they'd be so pleased with it, they'd tell their relatives and friends. So I don't think she has to worry about that, especially if one of us would. talk to her about it.
Joan's mother doesn't know either.
Yeah, I know. She could certainly do it if she wants to.
I thought so too.
But, Father Roderick has his program here. I see you go from, 4 o'clock Saturday until 3:45 Sunday. And departure, maybe you want to explain
Yeah,
something?
I suppose we hear about that ride again. Is that somewhat like the thing we agreed on when I was out there?
Right. Of course, as I mentioned, this has just been in effect since January.
Where is this, Rod?
We have it right at our place
Dunscotus College.
at Dunscotus.
Oh,
There is an administration wing which formerly had been the sisters' quarters. They used to have the laundry and the cooking and so forth at the college. And that whole area has been given over to a college administration section now, and was redesigned, and there's a little chapel in conjunction with it. So it's rather ideal, with the exception of our present college president, who is leaving, took exception to our meeting several times in the lounge area there. You saw that. And that created a little tension.
He's leaving, did you say?
He's leaving.
changed?
Yes.
Who's taking his place?
Father Jim, who is also the guardian,
Oh, yeah, that's
the
right.
president, right?
How would he be disposed towards the...
I think positively, yeah. In fact, he's the one I told you is going to be working with Laura on that.
Oh, that's great.
So, in general, they arrive around 4, and they have an opportunity for the sacrament of reconciliation that time. Now, the reason for that is that some of our fathers are available for confession at 4:30 in our main chapel, so that gives them a real ideal time for
Variety
that.
of confessions, too.
Yes, and we are putting in 2 of these reconciliation rooms.
Asphyxiation.
Yeah, asphyxiation. But they will be available probably at the end of June. So they might want to utilize those. But and then we have at 5:30 evening prayer in conjunction with the Eucharist. They're joined. And we have a homily based on the readings following Father Stephen's letter. Something practical, I think you said, that should be, but solidly based on the readings. Then they have a dinner. They all get together, usually at an outside restaurant. There are a couple of them close by, something like Howard Johnson's or something like that.
That takes care of that work problem that we have.
Yeah,
We're cooking.
So they have no problem with that, something really inexpensive.
You'd have to, a person that's really interested in this, and hopefully everybody's interested, at least to some degree, but those who want to get involved more and more and more, you kind of have to specialize, just take, kind of in a sense, a issue, realizing that there are others. Because to look at the whole complex, where do you begin? It's like a ball of string. You start on one little thing, you find out it's attached to something else. After a while, you get hold of the stress and throw the thing out.
In Oakland, 3 or 4 Jesuits moved into our parish. Actually, the bishop was violently opposed them because they were trained by Selinsky. He didn't want them in his diocese at all, but our provincial and the Jesuit provincial got together and said, well, the bishop doesn't know we want to. And they started this community organizing. I think it was the best thing that ever happened. And 2 years later, the bishop was, claiming them as his own boys. It was his idea to have them in there.
Is it worked?
It was local. You could do something. It wasn't a big. You weren't changing the world, but you were doing something. You were organizing people to do something to meet problems in their own area. I think that's at least the only sensible way I would see to go, to get involved in a local area. Because you get involved with the government, and you're in a big maze. Somebody else has to tackle the government.
This is, we have a community organized in the Patterson area. There's a couple priests there that took this, Salmon's course and so on too. But this is what network is about also. To create networks of collaboration. As there's a network or system depressing people, the system somehow or other becomes so complex. Where do you begin? And it becomes very oppressive. Very oppressive. So what about networks, which it speaks in here, this document of Justice in the World, speaks of networks of collaboration. And it's localized, and also when federal attention, you have to go to the federal government and find, then you have this whole system of networks throughout the state. But to be clued into that,
And sometimes I work
There's a dichotomy between those two things, though, right? I mean, you're saying that it should be local and more individual, and you're saying it's a system. It's got to fight a system.
If you're a professional,
the system locally, or the system nationally, depending on what kind of a system.
But isn't it true, though, we should be sanctifying systems, and you do that by growing up another system that's big enough. One individual isn't going to fight City Hall, but through the say, like the hierarchical system, you can go through a parish to a region, to a diocese, to an archdiocese, or whatever system you want, and get a big enough group. You can put enough pressure on a system to change it or to sanctify it. I think that we have to tell the missionaries, in other words, to plug into something that will carry their words on.
Some of these things are a little confusing to me because you throw around the word justice and injustice. Now, on a concrete level, exactly what is being referred to?
Well, what you want to be, say you're interested in world hunger.
We have the word justice, injustice, and system. Now, I'm not being facetious. I'm looking for information.
The farm workers.
Because there are certain things that I don't...
We have unionized industrial workers, and we've had them for years, but we are just getting to the point of unionizing farm workers. But they're workers also, and they have a right to be unionized, and yet the growers are, the big system is opposing that right. How is it that we could be for, the Knights of Labor and the KSC way back in the 1890s and just now the Cesar Chavez's are trying to put it together in the grape country and the lettuce country.
Now I can see that. Now there's something that I'm projecting that I think is also an injustice on the part of, let's say, the syndicates, the unions. For example, I want a job done in my house. I want an electrician. I have to pay $15 an hour for someone that fiddles around for an hour and perhaps works 15 minutes. Now, my brother-in-law is a bricklayer. They're allowed to they have to be paid so much an hour, and they're allowed to lay only a certain number of bricks. Therefore, everyone is do-it-yourself now, and these guys are being thrown out of jobs. Construction has stopped. Now, I get confused in this stuff. I'll be honest with you. There's something wrong. Something smells somewhere.
The system of unionism
because here in the United States,
one thing, and the way it is put together.
It seems to me that we are paying an unjust wage, that is, too much, for inefficient workers. We're paying professional salaries for amateurs, and even if a person is professional, very often the work done is slipshod. It isn't good. So to me, justice is a scale that balances.
And you're not against unions, you're against the abuse of unionism.
That's right.
Power.
That's right.
Wherever.
That's right. Wherever and under any circumstance.
Also abuse.
For example, I could see paying a man a just wage, but when I have to pay a bricklayer, for example, $9 an hour, and he's only going to fiddle around. Pardon? No, it's in the United States. In the United States? What's a lot? They might be getting more now. The last I knew they were getting, because my brother-in-law got out of the trade and has a different job now, because he couldn't afford to stay with the bricklayers. They were demanding, he couldn't get a job. The construction is gone down, and the union insists on demanding so much. Why do we have this lack of work? It isn't that there isn't work that should be done, but no one could afford to have the work done.
Yeah, see, now, to clue into groups who would study that specific, for one person to do the whole study
It's
or
impossible.
research is not impossible.
It's impossible.
But there are groups, now specifically whether they're working with bricklayers or studying that problem, I don't know. But a lot of the things are being studied. Farm workers certainly, unemployment certainly, prison reform, hunger, food stamps, senior citizens, so on and so on. So to plug into those groups who are doing a lot of the homework on it. So say it's an intelligent approach then. Because in fighting the system, you want to make sure that you get a better system to go in. Just to rip the house down, that's
easy.
That's kind of easy. Easy to fire shots at these things to say, well, the government should do this, that, and the other thing. But, you know, well, what? Give me an idea. So to clue into groups who are already doing the homework, like I said, specifically mentioned network. There's also Center for Concern. There's also the Convergence of Justice and Peace groups. There's about 40 of them involved. Our province is involved. Several of the religious provinces are involved around Milwaukee, the actual Convergence or network with them, what they're about. And like this network now, the network only takes about 5 or 6 issues and really does a thorough job of studying those things up, down, and sideways. There's one sister whom I have contact with, Maureen Keller, just to give you an example. Maureen Keller does nothing else but criminal justice. And she's done that for 4 years. She attends seminars, reads, goes here, there, and everywhere, gives talks. Just taking that one thing, which is quite complicated in itself, criminal justice, and then making that knowledge available to all these people that are involved in the network thing. So that if they're involved in criminal justice, they will know, how does this piece fit with that piece, and so forth and so on. So they have an intelligent approach that when we say, well, the criminal justice system is not too good, well, okay, now what are you going to say in its place? Okay, that's your first sentence. What's your next paragraph? Tell us how to improve it. And that's all she specifically has been doing, and there's others too, but just that's what I said.
What time?
It's about 25
after.
Yeah. I wanted to start at 4:30. Can you make a proposal of how we might be able to continue this?
Yeah. Just 8 suggestions here I got. And
we can't handle them right now because of time, but we want to finish. We want to.
Yeah, I'd make a proposal that matters of justice and peace be considered a constituent dimension of formation and continuing education for ISIM members. And then
I would ask you a further question that, to be answered at the moment, but while we're still here, as to a concrete way in which we do it. I am interested. I put it down as a possible additional committee that like Barbara was talking about. See, to have a priest who might be a consultant, to a committee of missionaries, and see how that might be implemented.
Yeah, I'd be one of the priests.
But what you were just explaining now, about what has been building up in the area that you're acquainted with, I'd like to know more about that personally, anyway. Because, in the explanation of the missionary's service to the church's mission, this is an area certainly where they plug into it, we would say. And how can they do it effectively, small as they are, keeping in mind what Bill said? There's some things we'd like to talk about a little more. I wonder if we could sort of gain a little time, maybe in an informal way as we gather. They're going to have a dinner, and I think they want to just time because of whatever they're making. And while I didn't plan anything like a formal session this evening, we do have a formal session tomorrow up until noon. If somehow we could still manage to gain some time this evening while we're standing around and keep on this, if it's all right with everybody else. It's a shame to drop this. We're in the middle of something, something important.
When will all this be over tonight?
I'm kept quite in the dark. I just know that there's a mass at 4:30, and I was told that they're honoring the Jubilee, which we're supposed to have later in the year. I guess the reason is probably that yourselves being present would be the only time, and so we make some commemoration of it. And then at dinner.
Yeah, we don't want to miss out on that.
No, you shouldn't.
Holy hour between 10 and 11.
Yeah.
Service for holy hours from 10 to 11.
But when I have the youth third order,
You don't mind if I
from
do
11
up to
to
you?
12.
And we will meet sometime after supper.
Yeah.
Yeah, sure.
What time is this?
Right now.
The order of the items as listed. Except that yesterday we started with 3. Yours was 3.
Four. His was 4.
4. And then we'll go back to 3 and 5, 6, 7. You ended up with a proposal, didn't you?
Right.
you mind repeating that?
Yeah, that themes of justice and peace be considered a constitutive part of the missionaries' initial formation and continuing education.
Let's write that down before.
Yeah, would you repeat that again?
That's
That themes of justice and peace be considered a constitutive dimension of a missionary's initial formation and continuing education.
May I suggest that you entwine in that the concept of the justice and being a constitutive part of the gospel message as such being incorporated. I think it has a point in this sense that instead of thinking of it as just another element of theology or something, that you see it as the mission of the church, therefore the mission of the missionaries.
that would be the motive for it.
Yeah.
Connecting it up with that.
Well, would that be, that's the thesis, like what I gave and the proofs of it or whatever is.
Well, I think you can easily put it right in there.
Something like, since the church so-and-so and so-and-so.
Yeah.
Since the church considers justice and peace a constituent dimension of her ministry,
Yeah.
then,
Yeah.
so,
Mhm.
okay.
Yeah, I would like to. Yeah, I think that would make more sense in their minds
More powerful too.
and make it more cohesive.
One second, we might read that a bit.
I first thought when you gave us that concept, my first interpretation was that you were saying, unless we are sincere about this, our other message will be flat. And that's not the point at all. This is essential to our message. We're failing in the message if we fail in it.
Oh, yeah, oh, yeah.
And how would you see it in concrete, that during the years of aspirantship and of course in the ongoing education, they be schooled in an awareness, first of all, of these things, and then in their apostolate.
Certainly, right during the aspirantship and so forth, there's certainly be a study of the document, that specific document, Justice in the World, that would be incorporated into their formation. And then as part of a continuing ed kind of thing, that this document be incorporated in several ways. One, excuse me, the circular letter for September 76 through and including June 77, there'd be one page in each one of the issues, no longer than one page, and which would be, what, about 9, or whatever issues. 10. On justice and peace. Several reasons. One, not to create a dichotomy like between the aspirants who are getting something kind of new, as it were, and then the old ones will say, well, we kind of never got this. Something like what happens in our education. Sometimes young guys get it and we never hear about it, and that kind of separates the group then. And also as a preliminary to the course of studies for 77 retreats, had the course of studies be given to justice and peace.
That, of course, goes way up to the top council. So
Yeah.
we could make proposals like that in the September meeting in Rome, but that does involve them, see.
And this would all be a basis or preliminary, too, for a stepping stone that when the bishops decide what they decide at this kind of location in Detroit in '76 in October, which in turn then is going to go to the National Council, National Conference of Bishops in November '76, and whatever they decide upon. Then there'll be a basis or groundwork for us to incorporate into some of that, into the priorities or the 5-year plan or a 5-year plan to come.
I would suggest that the first of those issues, those one page, be a very simple presentation of this thesis. In other words, the difference between justice and charity, how justice is an essential part of the message, that be presented simply so they don't get that lost. Otherwise,
oh, yeah, right. And it'd be all coordinated. I'd be willing to do all 12 or all 10, whatever it is. So, and you know, obviously, consultation.
I'm sure that Barbara would.
Yeah, there's going to be, before the termination of our meeting, we'll get back to that proposal made by Barbara yesterday about the various counselors for the commissions that she spoke about. And it would seem to me that the consultant would be needed for this particular area that we're talking about, the priest consultant. And if they're willing to accept, after it's explained to them, to accept perhaps a small commission among the other commissions which they have to develop this further within the Institute in its the different levels, then there'd be a priest consultant to it, why I think would be satisfying this.
Possibly, because it sounds like an awful lot all at once, kind of a thing. Granted, some kind of, like that was one of the suggestions here too, to implement this and so some kind of like core committee, like we have a core committee on liturgy, PR, so forth and so on. Possibly this would be a very nebulous kind of core committee to begin with. Then after some education, like for a year, then the more structured proposal could be made, or the more forceful proposal or something to be made. And then the 2 or 3 or 4 missionaries, whoever feel comfortable after reading those articles, kind of understanding what it's about, then clue into it. Where to ask them to form something like this right at the beginning is kind of staggering. You know,
yes,
might frighten back people off.
That's right, have to feel their way. In fact, it may be that the few that are appointed at the beginning will turn out not to be the best qualified. They may themselves ask to be relieved of it if they don't have the full comprehension all the time. Yeah, that takes a little time to implement that. If there's any contrary opinion concerning this, we entertain it here at this time. Otherwise, we'd go to a motion on this.
He was living out of poverty, but in other words, I think more rooted in what we might call the spirit of poverty.
Well, there are some concrete
one of them is the budget.
As to how to do it, too.
Yes.
I think they brought up something yesterday about that. Remember about how poor,
yes.
how to take care of
that girl. Yeah, that's a special case. Oh, Connie? Yeah, look, here it is. We have it.
Oh, we have it, yeah.
I guess I'm supposed to give that to you.
Everybody signed an airplane ticket?
Airplane
No,
ticket. So, in other words, they're accountable. They have to make out a budget which actually exemplifies in their particular condition that they do lead a frugal existence.
That expresses fundamentally the dependence upon the authorities in the Institute.
Yes.
Or dependence on the Institute for the use of what their material goods. Otherwise, you'd say they're independent, therefore they shouldn't talk about a promise of poverty. Well, how they live it is just like any other Christian depend on the degree of responsibility that they acknowledge. But here, by reason of their profession, they actually promise God in and through the Institute to live poverty. And of course, when it comes to how, the immediate result is a dependence. The surrender of independent use of material goods, and the substitution for that surrender would be a dependent use of material goods. And then to what extent or how needs, of course, further clarification. They do retain the dominion over their goods, as you said, which is not the case with those in a solid law of poverty. And the accountability is expressed, or the dependence I spoke of, which involves being accountable for, expressed in terms of this budget, which is presented at the beginning of the social year, meaning at the time of the retreat, really, when they present a twofold budget. One is the expenses the proposed budget for the coming year, based, of course, on experience of the past, and then the actual budget of expenses incurred during the year that has just passed, and which that actual budget, say of the year 70, from mid-75 to mid-76, has to correspond with what they estimated, the estimated budget, except insofar as they may have had permission to exceed certain amounts because of circumstances for that extra permission is needed. I think we all understand that, don't we, those of us who... Now, some further concrete ways of them carrying it out is this. They're told that whatever particular condition, social condition they may be in, and with us, social condition doesn't mean the same as it used to be in countries where you say the upper class, lower class. It's a case of what's the nature of your work or profession that puts you in some way into it classifies you some way. And how are you to present yourself or make yourself acceptable in that class to which you belong professionally or according to your occupation? If a person who's a school teacher were to go around in dungarees, she, at least in decent society, would hardly be acceptable. Maybe she would in some area, who knows. But anyway, ordinarily you'd say that that would not be acceptable. So she'd have to wear the kind of clothes that would be acceptable. This girl Joyce here works in an office in a telephone company. She's an official there. And she's expected to wear clothes